My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. For 40 years, I was a research biochemist, a man who believed that the universe was a series of elegant, solvable puzzles. I trusted in data, in methodology, in the cold, clear, and unimpeachable logic of the scientific method. I never imagined that these same principles would be twisted into a methodology of monstrous cruelty, and that my own home would become the laboratory. I stood in the chaotic, fluorescent-lit hallway of a hospital, watching as police officers arrested my brilliant daughter-in-law, Dr. Genevieve Thorne, for the systematic poisoning of my son, her husband, Julian. As they led her away in handcuffs, she did not weep or protest her innocence. She looked at the stunned faces of the doctors and nurses around us, her eyes blazing with a terrifying, righteous fury, and she shouted the words that would forever haunt the annals of our family and the scientific community. "I'm just contributing to science." In that moment, the devoted caregiver was unmasked as a monster, and the mysterious illness that was killing my son was revealed to be a crime of unimaginable and chillingly rational evil. Before the sickness, my life was a quiet composition of intellectual order. My home, a large historic house in the heart of Cambridge, Massachusetts, was less a domestic space and more an extension of my life's work. The walls were lined not with family photos, but with shelves of scientific journals and first editions of seminal works by Darwin, Pauling, and Crick. My late wife, a classicist, had been the heart of this home. Since her passing, I had become its mind. I was a man who found comfort in the predictable, observable laws of the universe. My retirement from the university had been a seamless transition. My days were a quiet rhythm of corresponding with former colleagues, reviewing papers for academic journals, and tending to the small, meticulously organized greenhouse in my backyard where I cultivated rare ferns. My world was small, but it was precise, and it made sense. The only variable, the only source of beautiful, unpredictable chaos in my life was my son, Julian. He was a history professor at the same university where I had taught, a kind, gentle, and brilliant man who had inherited my intellect, but none of my analytical detachment. He was a man of grand passions and deep romantic feeling, a poet in a family of scientists. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was the brilliant Dr. Genevieve Thorne. Julian had met Genevieve at a faculty mixer, and their connection was immediate and explosive. She was a rising star in the neuroscience department, a researcher of breathtaking ambition and charisma. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her mind that was truly captivating. She spoke of the human brain with the passion of an explorer and the ruthless precision of a conqueror. She was, in every way, a force of nature. They were a perfect complementary pair. Julian, the humanist, was utterly captivated by her scientific brilliance, and Genevieve, the scientist, seemed to be softened and grounded by his gentle, artistic soul. Their marriage was a happy, vibrant union, a perfect fusion of the arts and sciences. Genevieve and I shared a special bond. We were the two scientists in the family, and we would spend hours in my study, debating the ethics of genetic engineering or the latest breakthroughs in protein folding, a glass of sherry in our hands. She was the only person who truly understood my life's work, and I was one of the few who could appreciate the staggering scope of her own ambition. I saw her not just as a daughter-in-law, but as my intellectual heir. I admired her without reservation. I trusted her implicitly. The sickness in Julian began as an anomaly, a set of data points that did not fit any known pattern. It started with a series of strange, intermittent sensory distortions. He would complain that the color red suddenly seemed too loud, or that the taste of coffee had a metallic, burnt quality. Then came the memory lapses, not the gentle forgetfulness of a busy academic, but strange, specific gaps in his recall. He would forget a conversation we had just had, or be unable to remember the name of a historical figure he had lectured on for years. The doctors at Massachusetts General, the best in the world, were baffled. They ran every test imaginable: MRIs, PET scans, spinal taps. The results all came back clean. There was no tumor, no sign of stroke, no marker for early-onset Alzheimer's. Yet Julian's condition worsened at an alarming rate. Muscle weakness began to set in, his gait becoming unsteady. His speech would sometimes slur, his mind struggling to find the right words. He was a brilliant man whose own brain was slowly, inexplicably betraying him. It was during this terrifying, uncertain time that Genevieve truly became the center of our universe. She was magnificent. She took an immediate, indefinite leave of absence from her groundbreaking research to become his full-time caregiver. She transformed into a warrior on his behalf, a brilliant, tireless researcher dedicated to solving the puzzle of her own husband's illness. She coordinated with his team of baffled neurologists, her own expertise far surpassing theirs. She managed his complex and ever-changing regimen of medications. She spent every waking moment by his side, documenting his symptoms, her notebooks filling with meticulous, detailed observations. Our gratitude for her was boundless. In the face of an unthinkable, terrifying mystery, her sharp scientific mind was our only hope. As Julian's condition deteriorated, Genevieve's frustration with the slow, conservative pace of the medical establishment grew into a quiet, simmering rage. "They are dinosaurs, Eris," she would say to me in the evenings, her voice tight with an intellectual fury I understood all too well. "They are just throwing darts in the dark, treating symptoms. They are not addressing the root cause because they are too terrified to think outside the established protocols." Then she came to us with a new plan, a proposal born of her brilliance and her desperation. "I am going to find the cure myself," she announced, her eyes blazing with a fierce, determined light. "But I cannot do it within the confines of the university. There is too much red tape, too many ethical review boards that will slow us down. I need to set up a private, dedicated lab, here, in this house." The financial implications were staggering. To fund this private research, to buy the sophisticated equipment she needed, would cost a fortune. My own savings, though substantial, were not enough. "Eris," she said, her voice dropping, becoming soft and pleading. "I know this is an unthinkable thing to ask, but Julian's life is on the line. The equity in this house is our only remaining resource. If we sell it, we can fund the research that will save his life." It was a monstrous proposition, to sell the home I had shared with my late wife, the very bedrock of my life. But what was the alternative? To watch my son slowly, inexplicably fade away? Julian, in a moment of pained lucidity, made the decision for me. "Do it, Dad," he whispered, his hand clutching mine. "It is just a house. Please. I trust Jenin. She is my only hope." What could I do? My son's life was on the line, and his brilliant, loving wife was offering the only lifeline. My love for my son and my deep, abiding respect for Genevieve's scientific mind formed an unholy alliance that overruled all my own instincts. I agreed. The signing of the documents was a somber, surreal affair. I gave my daughter-in-law, a woman I loved and trusted like my own child, a durable power of attorney over my finances. I signed the preliminary agreements to sell my home. I was not just giving her my money, I was giving her my complete and total faith. With the funding secured, Genevieve went to work with a terrifying, superhuman efficiency. A section of our large, dry basement was transformed, almost overnight, into a state-of-the-art neuroscience laboratory. Sophisticated, expensive equipment I had only ever seen in university research facilities began to arrive in large wooden crates. Genevieve's care for Julian now took on a new clinical dimension. His life became a controlled experiment. His diet was meticulously measured, his sleep was monitored, and his medications, which were no longer standard prescriptions, but complex compounds she mixed herself in her new lab, were administered on a rigid schedule. She was a whirlwind of focused energy, often working in her lab for days at a time, emerging only to administer Julian's treatments and to document with a detached scientific precision the subtle shifts in his condition. It was during this time that the first true red flags began to appear, anomalies in the data that my own scientific mind could not ignore. The compounds she was giving Julian were not labeled with pharmaceutical names, but with complex chemical notations in her own handwriting. When I would ask for details about her research, her explanations, which had once been so clear and collaborative, became vague, evasive, and filled with jargon so advanced it was almost unintelligible. "Eris, it is a bit too complex to explain right now," she would say, a hint of impatience in her voice. "The methodology is highly proprietary. You have to trust the process." The process. I, a man who had dedicated his life to the scientific process, was now being asked to have a blind faith in one I was not allowed to see. My son was not just a patient anymore, he was a data set, and the brilliant, loving wife, who was our only hope, was beginning to feel less like a caregiver and more like a cold, detached, and utterly obsessive principal investigator. The basement, once a quiet, dusty archive of my past life, of old research papers and forgotten projects, was now the exclusive domain of Genevieve. It was no longer a part of our home. It was her sanctum sanctorum, and I was forbidden from entering. The transformation was completed on a cool autumn morning, October 1st, 2025. I went downstairs to offer my assistance, my mind buzzing with a new hypothesis about protein misfolding I had considered during the night, and I found my way barred. The simple wooden door had been replaced with a heavy steel-plated one, the kind used for secure laboratories. In place of a simple knob was a glowing electronic keypad. I found Genevieve in the kitchen, calibrating a complex-looking syringe. "There is a new door on the lab," I stated, my voice more neutral than I felt. "Yes," she said, not looking up from her task. "It is a sterile environment now, Aris. I cannot risk any contamination, any uncontrolled variables. Dust, microbes, even the fluctuations in temperature from the door opening and closing. It all affects the data." "Yes, Jen, I have worked in sterile environments my entire life," I said, a prickle of my old professional pride surfacing. "I know the protocols. I could be of help to you." She finally looked up, and her eyes, for the first time, were not those of a loving daughter-in-law. They were the cold, impatient eyes of a senior researcher addressing a junior lab tech who was questioning her authority. "With all due respect, Eris," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of condescending pity, "the science has advanced exponentially since your day. The methodologies I am using are complex. Your presence would be a distraction, not a help. Please, respect the protocol. Stay out of my lab." The words were a calculated professional dismissal. I was not just a father-in-law being told to stay out of a room. I was a scientist being told that his knowledge was obsolete, that he was a fossil, a variable to be eliminated. It was a profound and deeply personal humiliation. I had been locked out of the very process that was supposed to save my son's life. With me safely excluded, Genevieve's work became even more obsessive. She would disappear into her basement laboratory for days at a time, emerging only at precise, scheduled intervals to administer Julian's treatment and to document its effects. Her interactions with him were no longer those of a loving wife. She would check his reflexes, shine a light in his eyes, and ask him to perform a series of cognitive tests, her fingers flying across the screen of her tablet, her face a mask of intense, detached concentration. Julian's decline, under this new, aggressive regimen, accelerated in a way that felt both terrifying and unnatural. His moments of lucidity, once a daily occurrence, became rare, precious islands in a vast, foggy sea of confusion. His physical deterioration was linear, a steady, predictable downward slope that did not fit the erratic pattern of any neurological disease I had ever studied. It did not feel like a disease. It felt like a titration, a carefully managed experiment in which the dosage was being steadily increased. This was the beginning of my true torment, the central, agonizing paradox of my life. The only hope for my son's survival was the very woman my scientific intuition was screaming was the cause of his decline. I was trapped in an impossible emotional feedback loop. My heart, the father's heart, would see her tireless work, her selfless sacrifice, and it would swell with a desperate, grateful hope. But my mind, the scientist's mind, would see the anomalous data, the unnatural progression, the locked door, and it would whisper a single, terrible, and unthinkable word: iatrogenesis, an illness caused by a physician, or in this case, a scientist. I began to doubt my own mind. Was I just a grieving father, a retired scientist clinging to his own outdated knowledge, seeing conspiracies where there was only a brilliant, desperate effort to save a life? Was Genevieve a genius on the verge of a breakthrough, and I was just too old, too lost in my grief, to understand her methods? The pain of that doubt was a constant, grinding pressure, a force that was slowly pulverizing my own sense of reality. I had to try. I had to reach my son. I waited for one of his rare, clear moments, a brief window of lucidity on a Sunday afternoon when the fog in his eyes seemed to lift. I sat by his bedside, my heart aching at the sight of his frail, wasted frame. "Julian," I began gently, "I need to ask you something. The treatments, the medicine Jen gives you, how do you feel truly after you take it?" He looked at me, and a flicker of his old, intelligent self was there. "Tired, Dad," he whispered. "So tired." And my thoughts get jumbled. "Have you told her this?" I pressed. "Of course," he said. "She says it is a sign that the compound is crossing the blood-brain barrier. She says the fatigue is a necessary side effect of the cellular regeneration process." The jargon, the perfect, plausible scientific explanation, was her shield. I took a deep breath. "Julian, I am worried. I am worried about the secrecy, the locked lab. I am a scientist, and this is not how transparent, ethical research is conducted." His face, which had been open and loving, hardened. A shudder came down. "Dad, please," he said, his voice now a low, pained warning. "Do not do this." "Do what?" "I'm just asking questions. I want to understand." "No," he said, his voice gaining a strength I had not heard in weeks, the strength of a rehearsed argument. "You are doubting her. Jen warned me this might happen. She said your grief might make it difficult for you to accept the aggressive, unconventional nature of her work. She said you might even try to interfere." He looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful disappointment that was 1,000 times more painful than any anger. "She is the only one who can save me. Your questions, your doubt, it is not helping. It is causing stress we cannot afford. Please, just let her work. Trust her, as I do." It was a complete, total, and utter rejection. He had not just chosen to trust his wife, he had chosen to distrust his father. Genevieve had not just locked me out of her lab. She had locked me out of my own son's heart. I was completely and utterly alone. With my emotional and intellectual authority now completely neutralized, the final phase of the financial takeover began. The for sale sign was hammered into the manicured lawn of my Cambridge home, a garish public declaration of my family's private desperation. Genevieve's public performance was flawless. She would speak with friends, family, and my old university colleagues, her voice a perfect symphony of noble, tragic resolve. "We are selling Eris's beautiful home." "Yes," she would say with a heavy sigh, "it is a terrible sacrifice, but it is a small price to pay for the last best hope to save my husband's life." She was not just a devoted wife. She was a saint, a martyr to the cause of science and love. And I, if I expressed even a hint of my sadness or reluctance about the sale, was cast in the role of a selfish, sentimental old man, clinging to his material possessions while his son's life hung in the balance. I was trapped by her perfect, unassailable public image. My own quiet, discreet attempts to investigate her were a series of frustrating dead ends. The shell corporation she had created to fund her research, Thorn Neuro Regenerative Solutions, was a digital ghost. The invoices for the lab equipment were untraceable. I used my old university credentials to search academic databases for the colleagues she claimed to be consulting. They did not exist. Every door was a locked door, every path a dead end. I was a man of facts, and I was living in a world where all the facts were a carefully constructed fiction. The house sold with a speed that felt indecent. A cash offer from an anonymous investment group, which I had no doubt was another of Genevieve's creations, was accepted. The closing was set for the end of the month. The end was near. Julian's condition took another sharp downward turn. His relapses, I now began to notice, always seemed to coincide with a new, more potent phase of his treatment. He was now almost completely bedridden, his communication reduced to a few slurred words, his eyes vacant and lost. He was no longer a person. He was a specimen. Genevieve's mask of the stressed caregiver began to slip, replaced by the cool, detached, and sometimes frustrated focus of a scientist whose experiment was not proceeding exactly as planned. Her moments of tenderness with Julian were gone, replaced by a clinical efficiency. She was no longer a wife caring for a husband. She was an investigator observing her subject. The pain of it was a constant, suffocating weight. I was about to lose my home. I was watching my son die, piece by piece, day by day. And the terrible, unthinkable suspicion in my heart that his savior was, in fact, his executioner, was growing with every administered dose, every locked door, every condescending smile. I was at my absolute lowest point, a rational man trapped in an insane reality, a scientist with a hypothesis he could not prove and could not bear to believe. I was powerless, I was discredited, and I was on the verge of losing everything I had ever loved. The doubt was no longer about Genevieve, it was about myself. Had I already failed? Was it already too late? I was a man adrift on a sea of doubt, my scientific mind at war with my father's heart. The evening of October 1st, a date that marked a full year since Genevieve had locked me out of her lab and my son's fate, I was at my lowest ebb. The house was a landscape of cardboard boxes and echoing emptiness, the physical manifestation of my own hollowed-out life. The closing was just a week away. I had lost. My surrender felt total. I sat in my study, a glass of sherry untouched in my hand, staring at a photograph of a younger, happier Julian, and I felt the cold, seductive pull of giving up. What could I, a retired old man, do against a force as brilliant and as ruthless as Genevieve? And then, a small, insignificant miracle occurred. The lights in the house flickered, dimmed, and then surged back to life with a bright, electric hum. A power surge. It was a common occurrence in our old neighborhood. But a moment later, I heard a faint, electronic beep from the hallway, a sound I had not heard in a year. It was the keypad on the laboratory door, its internal battery fried by the surge, its lock mechanism defaulting to the open position. A jolt of pure electric adrenaline shot through me. Genevieve was out, a rare trip to a specialty supply house across the city. Julian was sedated, sleeping in his room. This was it. A chance. An opportunity so unlikely, so fleeting, it felt like a message from the universe itself. My heart pounding, I went to the basement door. It was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat. The lab was a place of cold, sterile order. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic. In the center of the room, a complex array of glassware and monitors gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a terrible, alien altar in the heart of my home. I did not know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to find something. My eyes scanned the room, the computer terminals, the chemical racks, the refrigerated storage units. Everything was password protected, labeled in a code I did not recognize. Then I saw it, a heavy gray fireproof filing cabinet, tucked away in a corner. It was locked, but the key was in the lock, a sign of Genevieve's supreme, arrogant confidence. My hands trembled as I turned the key. Inside were rows of neatly labeled binders. Most were filled with incomprehensible data, but one, bound in simple black leather, was different. It was not a data log. It was a journal. Her primary research journal. I opened it. The title, written on the first page in her elegant, precise script, made the blood freeze in my veins. A study in controlled neurodegeneration, mapping cognitive decline via custom toxin application. I sank onto a lab stool, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I flipped through the pages. It was all there. Meticulous, detailed, and utterly monstrous. Julian was not a patient. He was Subject JT. His illness was not a disease. It was the result of a custom-synthesized neurotoxin, a compound she had labeled TX1138, which she was administering in carefully calibrated, escalating doses. There were charts, graphs, video stills, his memory lapses, his sensory distortions, his muscle weakness. Every agonizing step of his decline was documented, correlated perfectly with a specific dosage. She was not trying to cure him. She was the cause. She had been systematically, scientifically, poisoning my son, and she had been documenting his slow, agonizing death as her life's great work. The horror of it was absolute, a perfect, elegant, and purely evil scientific methodology. The discovery did not make me scream. It did not make me weep. It made me cold. The biochemist in me, the man of data and protocols, took over. The grief and confusion were burned away, leaving only a single, clear, and unshakable objective: justice. I knew I could not act alone. I needed proof, irrefutable, and analyzed by a trusted third party. Before leaving the lab, I did two things. With the precision of my old lab days, I used a clean pipette to draw a small 5 milliliter sample from the refrigerated, password-protected vial labeled TX1138. I sealed it in a sterile container I found on a shelf. Then, I took out my phone and, my hands now perfectly steady, I photographed every single page of her journal, a digital archive of her monstrosity. I put the journal back, locked the cabinet, and left the lab, closing the door behind me, my heart a cold, hard, and purposeful machine. There was only one person in the world I could trust with a secret this large, a person with the scientific expertise to understand and the institutional power to act. I made a call on a secure line I had not used in years. "Lena," I said, my voice a low, urgent whisper. "It is Eris. I need your help. It is about Julian. It is a matter of life and death." Dr. Lena Petrova was not just the dean of the university's medical school. She was my former protege, a brilliant, formidable biochemist whom I had mentored from a graduate student to one of the most powerful women in academic medicine. She was a woman of fierce integrity and a mind as sharp as a diamond. We met an hour later in her private laboratory at the top of the medical research tower, a place of hushed, late-night science. Lena listened as I laid out the whole insane story, her face an unreadable mask of professional focus. When I was done, I placed the small sealed vial and my phone, with the photographs of the journal, on the clean, stainless steel surface of her lab bench. She was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on the vial. Her first reaction was that of a scientist grappling with an impossible, paradigm-shifting piece of data. "Eris, it is unbelievable." "Look at the journal," I said, my voice a raw command. She scrolled through the images on my phone. I watched as her professional skepticism slowly, horribly, morphed into a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She saw the data, the charts, the cold, clinical documentation of a human being's systematic destruction. "My God," she whispered, looking up at me, her eyes wide. "This is a methodology of murder." She wasted no time. With the focused intensity of a surgeon at an operating table, she went to work. She took the vial and began to prepare the sample for her lab's mass spectrometer. For the next 2 hours, we worked in near silence, a master and his former student united in a grim, terrible purpose. The results, when they appeared on the screen, were the final damning confirmation. "It is a custom synthesized peptide chain," Lena said, her voice a low, angry hum as she pointed to the complex molecular diagram on the monitor. "It is designed to act as a neurotoxin, specifically targeting the myelin sheath of the neurons. It mimics the symptoms of a rapid, aggressive prion disease, but it is completely artificial. It would be untraceable in any standard hospital toxicology screen." "Eris," she said, turning to me, her face pale with fury. "This is a scientific masterpiece, and it is a weapon of pure evil." "We have the smoking gun," I said. "Yes," she agreed, her eyes hardening. "Now, we build the case. I will run a full analysis. We will document everything. The university's legal counsel will need to be brought in. And you," she said, her gaze intense, "you have the most dangerous job of all. You must go home. You must play the part of the grieving, powerless old man. You must not let her suspect a thing. We have one chance to do this right." Returning to the house that night was like becoming a deep-cover agent in a hostile foreign state. I was armed with the truth, but I had to continue my performance as a man who had none. I perfected the role of the broken, compliant father, my grief a perfect camouflage for my secret, cold rage. My new mission, guided by Lena and a discreet university lawyer she brought in, was to gather the second half of the evidence, the financial motive. While Lena's team worked on the chemical analysis, my job was to get inside Genevieve's computer. It was a terrifying risk. I had to wait for one of her long stints in the basement lab. I went into the study, the place she had forbidden me from entering, and I sat at her desk, my heart pounding. Her laptop was password protected, but I, the man who had taught her how to think, knew her mind. Her password, I guessed correctly, was the chemical formula for serotonin, the neurotransmitter of happiness. The irony was grotesque. The files were all there, hidden but not hidden well enough from a man who knew what to look for. I found the offshore bank accounts. I found the correspondence with the shell company that had bought my house, a company she secretly controlled. I found the emails detailing the fraudulent Swiss clinic, the fake invoices, the entire elaborate fiction she had created to justify the river of money she was funneling from my accounts into her own. I copied everything to a small encrypted USB drive Lena had given me. It was the full, sordid, and now provable story of her greed. She was not just a monstrous scientist, she was a common thief. The closing on the house was now just 3 days away. The plan was in place. Lena had the final, conclusive lab report on the toxin. We had the complete financial records. We had the photographs of her murder journal. We had an airtight case. We met one last time, a clandestine war council in Lena's office with the university's top lawyer and a grim-faced detective from the state police. "We could arrest her now," the detective said. "We have enough." "No," I insisted, a cold, clear strategy having formed in my mind. "If we arrest her at the house, she will spin a story. She will destroy evidence. She will claim I planted it. We have to get her out of her environment. We have to bring her onto our turf, a place where we control the variables." The trap was set. The next morning, I would make a frantic 911 call, reporting that Julian had suffered a sudden, violent seizure, that he was unresponsive. I would insist, with the panic of a terrified father, that he be taken to one place and one place only, the university hospital, Lena Petrova's hospital. The plan was approved. That night, I sat at my son's bedside, watching his slow, shallow breathing. Genevieve was in her lab, no doubt preparing the next dose of her medicine. I looked at Julian's face, so pale and still, and I made a silent promise. The experiment was over. Tomorrow, the scientist was about to become the subject of a new and final study in justice. The morning of the endgame arrived, a crisp, clear autumn day that felt like a mockery of the dark, ugly business at hand. I stood in the quiet hallway outside my son's bedroom, my heart a cold, heavy metronome in my chest, counting down the final moments of the life we had known. I had said my goodbyes to the ghost of the woman Genevieve had once pretended to be. Now it was time to confront the monster she truly was. With a hand that was surprisingly steady, I dialed 911. My voice, when I spoke, was a flawless performance of a terrified, grieving father. "My son," I choked out, the feigned panic mixing with the very real terror of the moment. "Julian Thorne. He is having a seizure. He is unresponsive. Please, you have to hurry." I gave the address, then added the crucial pre-planned instruction. "You must take him to the university hospital. His specialist, Dr. Petrova, is on staff there. Nowhere else. Please." The effect on the house was instantaneous. My frantic call shattered the quiet, clinical order Genevieve had so carefully maintained. She burst out of her lab, her face a mask of alarm and irritation. This was an uncontrolled variable. This was a chaotic event she had not planned, and she hated it. "What is going on?" she demanded. "It is Julian," I cried. "He is having a seizure." She rushed to his side, but the paramedics, who had been staged just a block away, arrived with a speed that was part of our plan. They were professional, efficient, and completely in on the sting. Genevieve immediately tried to take control, spewing a torrent of complex, misleading medical jargon about Julian's undiagnosed degenerative disorder. "I am his primary researcher and caregiver," she asserted, trying to establish her authority. "I must accompany him. All of his medications and protocols are with me." "Of course, ma'am," the lead paramedic said, his face impassive as he helped load Julian into the ambulance. She grabbed a black medical bag, the one containing her poisons, and climbed in beside my son, a wolf shepherding the lamb to a slaughterhouse she did not realize was of her own making. I followed behind in my own car, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, a silent, avenging father on the final journey of a long, terrible war. The emergency room at the university hospital was a scene of controlled chaos, but it was our chaos. As they wheeled Julian's gurney through the automatic doors, a team of doctors, led by a trusted colleague of Lena's named Dr. Marcus, intercepted them. "We have been alerted," Dr. Marcus said, his voice a calm, commanding presence. "Let us get him to Trauma Bay 1 immediately. We need to run a full emergent toxicology panel and a cerebral MRI. "That is unnecessary," Genevieve snapped, trying to follow them. "His condition is not toxicological. It is a unique protein folding disorder. I have his full protocol right here." A calm but unyielding nurse stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am, we need to stabilize him first. Please, wait in the family consultation room. The doctor will be with you as soon as we have an assessment." "I am Dr. Thorne," she said through gritted teeth, her voice a low, furious snarl. "I am his wife. I am not going to a waiting room." "In this hospital," the nurse replied, her voice polite but her eyes as hard as steel, "you are family, and the family waits here." The doors to the trauma unit swung shut, separating Genevieve from my son for the first time in months. She was a queen without her kingdom, a scientist without her lab, a predator without her prey. Her control was broken. She stood for a moment, her face a mask of pure, impotent fury, before she spun on her heel and stormed into the small, sterile consultation room they had indicated. I followed her in, the quiet, grieving father, and closed the door behind us. The trap was now set and sealed. The consultation room was a small, windowless box, a place designed for the delivery of bad news. Genevieve paced the tiny space like a caged animal, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a way to reassert her control. I sat in a chair, my hands clasped, my face a carefully composed mask of fatherly concern. After 10 long, tense minutes, the door opened. But it was not Dr. Marcus. It was Dr. Lena Petrova, the dean of the medical school. In her crisp, white lab coat, she was not alone. She was flanked by two serious-looking people in plain clothes, a man and a woman, who I knew were state police detectives. Genevieve froze, her eyes narrowing as she instantly recognized a new, more formidable threat to her authority. "Dean Petrova," she said, her voice tight. "What is the meaning of this? Where is my husband?" Lena did not answer her question. She walked to the small table in the center of the room and placed a single and sealed evidence bag upon it. Inside was the small vial of clear liquid I had taken from the lab. "Dr. Thorne," Lena began, her voice not that of a colleague, but of a prosecutor, "we have been analyzing your husband's unique medical case. And we have also, with the help of your father-in-law, been analyzing the contents of this." She tapped the vial. A fascinating custom-synthesized peptide, a true scientific masterpiece, designed to mimic the symptoms of a rapid prion disease while remaining completely untraceable in a standard toxicology screen. "We were wondering if you would care to share your research with the university's ethics board." The color drained from Genevieve's face. Her brilliant mind processed the new data in an instant. The vial, Lena Petrova's presence, my own quiet, watchful calm. She understood. This was not a medical emergency. It was an ambush. "And just in case your research notes are not up to date," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent, sterile room, "we also found your primary research journal, the one titled A Study in Controlled Neurodegeneration, subject JT." The last of her composure crumbled. The brilliant scientist, the devoted wife, all of it dissolved, leaving behind a cornered, desperate criminal. "You," she whispered, her eyes locking on me, full of a pure, unadulterated hatred. "You did this. This is insane," she spat, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "You are a senile old man. You have sabotaged my research. You have no proof." "On the contrary," Lena said, her voice cold as ice, "we have a complete chemical analysis of the toxin. We have high-resolution photographs of every page of your murder journal. And we have your husband." As if on cue, the door opened again. A nurse wheeled Julian into the hallway just outside the door's glass window. He was sitting up. The foggy, vacant look in his eyes was gone. An IV drip was feeding a steady stream of an antidote into his arm. He was weak, he was pale, but he was lucid. And he was looking at his wife with an expression of pure, dawning, and absolute horror. He had been told everything. The sight of him, alive and aware, was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. It was the failed experiment, the living proof of her crime. The detective stepped forward. "Dr. Genevieve Thorne," the male detective said, his voice calm and final, "you are under arrest for the attempted murder of your husband, Julian Thorne, and for multiple violations of state and federal laws regarding illegal human experimentation." As he reached for her arm, something in her broke. The struggle was not physical. It was an explosion of pure, monstrous, and unapologetic narcissistic rage. As they cuffed her hands behind her back, she ignored her husband. She ignored me. She ignored the police. She looked past them, out into the busy hospital corridor, at the faces of the doctors and nurses who had stopped in their tracks, all staring in stunned, silent disbelief. Her career, her reputation, her entire identity as a brilliant scientist was collapsing in a public and humiliating spectacle. She did not scream for a lawyer. She did not protest her innocence. She screamed her justification. "You fools!" she shrieked, her voice a raw, echoing sound of pure, unadulterated hubris that filled the entire hospital wing. You are stopping progress. You have no idea what you are interfering with. I am not a criminal." Her eyes blazed with a terrifying righteous fire as she delivered the final, shocking, and utterly immoral line that would be on the front page of every newspaper in the country the next morning. "I'm just contributing to science." The words hung in the stunned, absolute silence of the hospital. It was not a confession. It was a proud, defiant declaration of her own monstrous scientific godhood. And it was the most damning testimony of all. The chaotic, echoing moments after Genevieve's arrest were a whirlwind of controlled medical urgency. Her horrifying, self-justifying scream, "I'm just contributing to science," hung in the air like a toxic vapor as she was led away. But the hospital's focus, and my own, was now singular. Julian. He was rushed from the hallway to the intensive care unit, a place I, as a biochemist, understood all too well. It was a world of monitors, IV drips, and the quiet, constant hum of life support machines. My brilliant, formidable friend, Dean Lena Petrova, took personal charge of his case. She was no longer just an ally. She was my son's lead physician, a warrior armed with the very science Genevieve had perverted. The battle for Julian's life was a slow, painstaking, and agonizing one. Lena's lab worked around the clock, analyzing the custom neurotoxin, developing and administering a series of chelating agents and experimental antidotes. It was a high-stakes, real-time scientific experiment, but this one was aimed at healing, not destruction. I did not leave his side. I sat by his bed, watching the monitors. My own deep knowledge of biochemistry a form of torture, as I understood the profound cellular damage the poison had inflicted. I was a father watching his son fight for his life, and a scientist watching a brilliant, terrible puzzle being slowly, carefully taken apart. The psychological toll of the betrayal was a battle for another day. The first, most important war was for his physical survival. Julian survived. He woke from the medically induced coma a week later, the poison purged from his system, but his body and mind a battlefield of its effects. As he began his long, arduous recovery, the legal battle against Genevieve began. It was not just a trial, it was a global event, a landmark case at the dark intersection of scientific ambition, medical ethics, and criminal law. The media dubbed her the Mengele of Cambridge. The scientific community was in an uproar, simultaneously horrified by her methods and morbidly fascinated by the monstrous genius of her custom-designed toxin. Genevieve's defense was as shocking and as narcissistic as her crime. She did not plead insanity. She did not show remorse. She and her high-powered legal team argued that she was a visionary scientist, a martyr for the cause of progress, being persecuted by an outdated, fearful establishment. She claimed that Julian was not a victim, but a willing, fully informed partner in her groundbreaking research, a research, she argued, that would one day unlock the secrets to curing Alzheimer's and dementia and save millions of lives. But her own meticulous, monstrously detailed research journal was her undoing. It was presented as Exhibit A, a cold, clinical, and undeniable record of her crime. The jury saw the photographs of the pages, the charts correlating Julian's agonizing decline with her escalating dosages. They listened to my testimony and to the heartbreaking, halting testimony of my son, who had to recount from a wheelchair the story of his own slow, agonizing poisoning at the hands of the woman he had loved and trusted. The verdict was a resounding and historic condemnation. She was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, kidnapping, practicing medicine without a license, and multiple violations of federal laws regarding illegal human experimentation. The judge, in his sentencing, called her a stain on the noble pursuit of scientific knowledge. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, her brilliant, twisted mind now permanently confined to a cage of her own making. With justice served, the long, quiet, and infinitely more difficult work of healing began. The house, which had been seized as a crime scene, was eventually returned to me. The basement laboratory was dismantled by a state hazmat team, a symbolic and literal purification of the space, but the house was no longer a home. It was a museum of a nightmare. Julian's recovery was the central, all-consuming project of our new lives. The toxin had left a terrible, lasting legacy. He had significant neurological damage. He had to learn to walk again, his movements aided by a cane. A persistent tremor remained in his hands. The most painful damage, however, was to his mind. The poison had created gaps in his memory, like missing pages from his life's book. He could no longer access the vast, detailed historical knowledge that had been the foundation of his career and his identity. He could never be a professor again. I became his full-time caregiver, a role reversal that was both a burden and a blessing. My scientific knowledge, which had once been a source of intellectual pride, was now put to the practical, loving work of managing his physical therapy, his medications, his cognitive exercises. Our bond, which had been strained by his misplaced faith in Genevieve, was forged anew in the crucible of this shared daily struggle. The love was still there, but it was different now, quieter, more profound, grounded not in ideas and debates, but in the simple, sacred act of caring for each other. The financial assets, which the courts had frozen and eventually recovered from Genevieve's web of accounts, were substantial. But they felt like blood money. We knew we could not simply live on it. We had to give it a new purpose, to transmute the currency of a monstrous crime into a force for good. With the guidance of Lena Petrova and the university's legal team, we established the Julian Thorne Foundation for Bioethical Integrity. It was not a research foundation. It was a watchdog. Our mission was to fund independent oversight for private, high-stakes scientific research, to provide legal support for whistleblowers, and to advocate for stronger, more transparent ethical guidelines in the sciences. We found a new purpose in this shared mission. Julian, unable to lecture on history, became a powerful, compelling public speaker, a living testament to the human cost of unchecked ambition. His story was a cautionary tale he told with a quiet, humble, and devastating grace. I worked behind the scenes, using my scientific expertise to review research proposals and my administrative skills to run the foundation. We had been the subjects of a horrific experiment, and now we were working to ensure no one would ever have to endure such a thing again. Today is October 1st. It is the anniversary of the day Genevieve locked me out of her lab, the day my powerlessness felt absolute, the day before the first spark of my resistance. I am standing in my greenhouse. It is no longer just a place for my old familiar ferns. It is a specialized conservatory now. A place of healing, it is dedicated to the preservation and study of rare medicinal plants from around the world. In a place of honor, under a special set of grow lights, is a collection of rare, delicate orchids and botanicals I have sourced from the remote central highlands of Vietnam, a region of profound and mysterious biodiversity. Their quiet, patient, natural beauty is a constant antidote to the memory of Genevieve's violent artificial science. Julian walks in, his gait slow but steady, his cane tapping a gentle rhythm on the stone floor. He no longer looks like a victim, he looks like a survivor. He smiles, and we begin the quiet, shared work of tending to the plants. I often think of Genevieve's final, shocking cry. "I'm just contributing to science." I spent my life believing that the pursuit of knowledge was the highest, most noble calling. I have learned that knowledge without empathy is a poison. Science without a soul is a monster. The greatest contribution to science, I have come to believe, is not the discovery of a new truth, but the wisdom to know which truths must be bound by the chains of our own humanity. My life's most important experiment was not conducted in a lab with beakers and burners. It has been here, in this house, in the slow, painstaking, and ultimately successful process of helping my son heal, of rebuilding a life from the ashes of a brilliant, terrible fire. And in that, I have found a truth that is more profound and more beautiful than any scientific law I have ever known.